Fitz, it's 2 weeks until the early signing period, so it's coming down to it. There's a lot of stuff in the rankings, but there's also a lot of stuff in the rubber meets the road of what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks, and you've got that for us right now, so lay it on us. What's going on in recruiting?
How crazy is it, man? Just a couple of weeks. You were talking, we had our meeting last week, and you were like, hey, what are we doing for National Signing Day? And I'm like, I'm not even thinking about that. And then I'm like, oh, that's 3 weeks away. We should probably think about that.
Yeah.
Because it's crazy this year. Of course, December 4th, I believe, the first week of December instead of the third week of December, which changes the calendar greatly, because you always used to bring in guys for official visits in December, do your banquet and have everybody around the program, have the family reunion, all that kind of stuff. But now all of a sudden you don't have that. And also there was a question on the board. I meant to send it to T Frank to put it up on the screen, but I forgot. Somebody asked if James Franklin was going to get to go see Andrew Olish and before signing day. And those are really off the board right now. There's no in-home visits until January, which is kind of pointless in the recruiting aspect of it. He'll go out, see those families, many of which will already have their child on campus as an early enrollee. But you take out that window of in-home visits. You remember Joe Paterno going to Terrell Pryor, all those things that always used to crop up in December. It was one of the more interesting things, even though I'm not sure a ton changed on those visits. They're just out now. So after the Maryland game, that's it. Like, you're going into a quiet period, into a dead period. It does open up in December, which helps a little bit, and which is probably something we didn't talk about very much to begin with, because I thought December was all dead. But it's actually, there's technicalities. You can have guys in, but you're not going to be able to host recruits for the playoff game. If Penn State has a playoff game, you cannot give away tickets to postseason events, which is an NCAA rule. It's going to affect all of them. Doesn't mean that recruits can't come and buy tickets and show up and watch the game. But it's, if you're expecting an additional recruiting weekend based on
you don't get a freebie to expand the lead over teams that didn't make a playoff game.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So we will see what happens with how they get around that, because I think there will be recruits that make that trip, but you're going to have to pay for it. Like, that's going to be a whole different thing. And you can't actually, bring them to the recruiting lounge and do all that hosting and things like that. But actual recruiting in the class of 2025, Zahir Mathis, the defensive end from Imhotep Charter in Philly, decommitted from Ohio State yesterday. That's an interesting one, because I don't believe he has a landing spot in mind, and I don't believe it's going to be Penn State.
Interesting.
I will hedge a little bit and say Penn State's approach with in-state prospects is the reason that I'm still following this, because they don't want to be beaten in state. This is a top 5 prospect in state. He did drop quite a bit in the on 300 rankings yesterday, which was probably expected if you've been following along. But that's an interesting one to me, because all of a sudden that's a wide open 2 weeks from National Signing Day situation. Zahir Mathis decommitted from Ohio State. I think Ohio State's still in the picture. I think there are some other schools that just haven't been around that will end up in it. I think there's a lot at play here from an NIL standpoint, and I don't know that it's online with what they expect it to be. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks for Zahir Mathis. We'll see if he pops up anywhere. Imhotep lost to St. Joe's Prep in the state playoffs last weekend, so they've got open weekends to go visit other places. So we will see what happens with Mr. Mathis. Again, I said it a couple weeks ago on the show. I don't expect him in Penn State, but I'll hedge a little bit about that because he's an in-state prospect. But at the same time, it was not headed that way, and Penn State hasn't been really hard on him. They got Chaz Coleman a couple of weeks ago as a pass rusher, so that's a very interesting wrinkle this late in the cycle for a guy that's been committed to Ohio State since January, February, something like that. It's been a long time. So moving on, another announcement coming up. Kendra Harrison was just on campus for the whiteout, the 5-star tight end from North Carolina. He's going to announce on November 30th. It's got a final group, I believe. Florida State. Oh, there it is on the board. Florida State, Oregon, Miami, North Carolina, Penn State, and Tennessee. Steve Wilfong put in a pick for Oregon, so I think this one's heading out west.
Penn State is not like a lot of these schools on this list. It is a kind of an outlier there.
They're not, but they've been around there for Harrison for a long time, and I think they're up on the list, but I don't think they're number 1 on the list. And I think Oregon, again, we've seen it in this past 2025 cycle. They will continue to be a force to be reckoned with all over the country. Like, this is not a situation where you're looking at Florida doing really well in the South, or you're looking at Clemson, cleaning up Middle Atlantic and some stuff like that. It is truly nationwide when you've got the ability to do the things that Oregon can do. You saw it with Brandon Finney earlier in this cycle, even though Finney is still out there for Penn State as a potential flip target. Let's talk Finney. Finney and McDonough lost to Archbishop Spalding and Malik Washington over the weekend in their playoffs, so their season is done. The sort of hard and fast rule with Finney was that he was not going to do any recruiting until after the season. Now, he does have an official visit scheduled to Michigan. We will see if that happens next week. I could go either way on that, or excuse me, this weekend. See if it happens this weekend. It could go either way on that one. I still think Penn State is in a good spot here for the Oregon commit, and we'll see how quickly he wants to get this over. I think there's some dynamics at play where some of them want to get it done now, some of them can wait until December 4th. But Penn State really wants Brendan Finney to get this one across the line. Of course, Quincy Porter, the 2025 Ohio State commit, just recently elevated to 5-star status on 3.
Wow.
There, he visited for the whiteout as well. So it's a very I don't want to say a full board, but when you take a look at what Penn State was doing this time last year, still a lot of targets that are out there for Penn State. We're going to talk about Andrew Olish in the next section, but he's still out there as well.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up here because we got a lot of other things to get to as well. But are you surprised? Zahir Mathis decommits, Quincy Porter openly being recruited by other schools and going to other schools. Usually Ohio State, I don't want to say they're bulletproof, because when you were recruiting 5-star players and high-level players that everyone's interested in, the recruitment is never over, but it feels like they usually get what they want. Does this feel like a difference, an anomaly? I guess, how are you viewing this particular cycle?
It's just really interesting because I think it's played out kind of how we thought it would, in the sense that when those guys were going elsewhere in the summer, you kind of had an inkling as to what was driving those decisions. And as we got closer to National Signing Day, things sort of get closer to home, that gravitational pull, as I called it back then. So I'm really interested to see how this one finishes off. I mean, you're not going to go 7 for 7 or whatever if you're Penn State, but you knock off a couple of these guys and all of a sudden your class looks a lot better. So I know Penn State's number 15 in the country right now, and if you can knock off a Brandon Finney or an Olish or something along those lines, all of a sudden that number goes up. So when you have those, like, I think that's kind of what's been missing in this class of 2025, even though we're going to talk about some on 3 rankings movements, is those top 100 guys, those top 50 guys. They make a big difference when you're talking about the overall ranking of your class.
Yeah, and guys that were either in state or we generally expected Penn State to have a strong shot with, or were leaders for at some point. That has been a big, speed being expensive has been a big part of this, whether or not it is directly NIL or otherwise. But let's get to that. Let's get to the latest on-3 recruiting update for 2025 as we head down here in the stretch, as we said, 2 weeks away from the early signing day, or the national signing day proper, basically is what it is now. So let's talk about Malachi Goodman. We put up a lot of players on the screen here that aren't Nittany Lions. This one, he is a Nittany Lion and is a top 50 prospect in the country. So this, to explain how this worked for Malachi Goodman, can you take us through his rankings journey to where he is right now?
Oh man, that is quite a journey, because I was very big on him. I think we had him as an 87 at one point early in the recruitment. I said, hey, this guy's good. He's like a top 150 guy. Now he's a top 50 guy according to us and on 3, which that was a big jump. I'm not gonna lie. I was not expecting him to go that high. But you'll take it, I guess. He is up 60 some spots. He was just outside the top 100 last week, and then all of a sudden number 46 into the top 100 in the industry, which I think is helpful. It's telling to figure out where that one is. But you look, I was watching him early in the season, and I'm like, there's a little bit of concern here. He kind of looks like a guard. He kind of looks like he's a little bit heavy. But I think that playing through the season, you saw progression, and you saw, first off, body change. He's under 310 pounds now, which I think he was in the 320s at some point. So he's dropped some weight, and because he's dropped some weight, those feet have continued to move, and they've, that's what happens with these guys. They get lighter, and then all of a sudden they find it, and they'll put the right weight on eventually. He'll be 315 pounds, but he'll be a different 315 pounds with Chuck Losley than he is.
A little bit like Donnie Harbor, maybe. I know I don't want to make a one-to-one comparison, but good feet, athleticism that has been maybe a little bit obscured this year, like you talked about at the beginning of the year, just from a fitness perspective.
I see the track that you're on. Donnie was I think beyond that. But that was the interesting thing that we saw from Donnie in camp. And now apparently he's playing a little bit more and doing some nice things late in the season as a true freshman, which is awesome to see. But you've got a situation where, you know, you melt some of that stuff away and you've got what you've got. Like your feet are your feet. Like whether you're 275 pounds or 350 pounds, like your feet are not changing a ton. Like it's going to help, but it's not changing a ton. So you take some of that weight off, you get the right weight on, you get the lower body strength, which is basically what's missing from most of these guys in terms of high school prospects. Is you're going to have a completely different set of lower body strength standards when you get to college. So that's where that weight's going to come, and it's going to be a little bit differently dispersed than you and I, T. Frank, in terms of that weight. So I think that'll come on. I do think that he can still play offensive tackle. I think it's going to be a guy that has that type of frame that you feel really good about. By the way, we didn't talk about this, but Egan Boyer played quite a bit on Saturday. And this is a completely different conversation because that guy is 6'8", legit 6'8". He's 290 pounds or something like that. And he looks like he's 240 pounds like that. Yeah. The duality of offensive line recruits and prospects and younger prospects on the roster is really, really fun to watch, but definitely saw some good things in Egan Boyer. And I think that that's why you feel confident about this room moving forward. You bring back Shelton, bring back Dunca, you bring back Rucci for another year. And all of a sudden you've got a pretty decent looking two deep, which allows you to move Javen Williams into guard, which they did after JB Nelson got injured there. So you've got good things coming along for that offensive line room, I believe.
Yep. And if you want to hear more and you want to read more about this change in the recruiting updates, who moved up, both of Penn State's defensive end recruits that I'm very excited about, Chaz Coleman and Jaden Woods. We're not going to get into them today because we got to get to Between the Lines, but definitely go check that out. And if you haven't, check out Jaden Woods' highlights. I watched them, the updated ones for this year. Oh, man, is he good at football.